Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming back. I hope you had a delicious lunch. Before I announced my next panel, there's just one little thing I want to share with you. I don't know if anyone of you have already noticed by the 2 days that actually one step out of this room, there's a like 2 meters wide and 2 meters high banner stand, and that is the YKIP's banner stand. And there is this slogan in the middle of this. The banner stand says, "I just called to say I love you." And that is the feeling that I have toward every one of you. Okay, now let's start. Thank you. The afternoon session. Yesterday and this morning, we have discussed a lot of IMO regulations and vessel emissions. These are not the only challenges we face. Pollution of our oceans, a critical natural resource, primarily generated from land-based activities. Garbage in the ocean, plastic among the worst. And its impact to the global ecosystem is shared responsibility, which requires urgent attention. Our next panel, Clean Ocean and its Governance, will address this critical global issue. Your moderator for this panel is founding president of the World Ocean Council, WOC. As a global blue economy business organization, WOC aims for bringing together representatives from oil, gas, shipping, fisheries, agriculture, tourism, offshore renewables, mining investors, and others in the International Business Alliance to create leadership, collaboration, and action on corporate ocean responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome President of WOC, Mr. Paul Holthus, and his panel. Paul, please have the floor.
Thanks very much, Sakura, and thank you very much, Mariko-san, for inviting us here, and it's been good to have known you and worked with you over the years, and congratulations on everything you're doing here with the port, and we've been very honored to have the Port of Yokohama join as a member of the World Ocean Council. So I'll be speaking a little bit more about the big picture and the range of industries operating in the ocean and what this means for governance and dealing with these environment issues and what it takes to maintain a clean ocean at a global scale with all the various sectors involved. And we've heard repeatedly yesterday and today about what's at the top of the list in terms of challenges for the maritime industry and ports, and that has been the environmental and sustainability issues. So that's what we're focusing on here this afternoon, but also the context of governance and who is being governed by what means and how we are, how that's being developed over time and how that affects industry operations and opportunities. So to start with, we will look at the big picture from the point of view of global ocean governance and the law of the sea. And so we're very honored to have Mariko Kawano from the Waseda University Law Faculty to talk to us about the law of the sea. So please join me in welcoming Mariko to kick off this session. So please. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Chairperson. It is a great honor for me to be invited to such an important session. I'm very much grateful to the kind invitation of Mr. Moroka. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to talk about some views from the viewpoint of the international law. So the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, hereafter referred to as the UNCLOS, was adopted in 1982. It is a convention that is expected to regulate all the matters concerning the law of the sea. One of the special features of this convention is the emphasis on the importance of the protection and preservation of the marine environment. Chapter 2 sets out the rules for the protection and preservation of the marine environment, and there are other various provisions relating to this subject. including the provisions concerning the conservation and management of marine living resources. This feature of the UNCLOS reflects that the protection and preservation of the marine environment was considered to be one of the key issues of the law of the sea, even at the time of its drafting process during the 1970s. At the same time, it is necessary to note that since the adoption of the UNCLOS, the modes or the modalities of use of the ocean areas have changed. The scientific and technological knowledge of human beings on the marine environment has changed and developed very rapidly and profoundly. And moreover, the global environment has changed significantly too. Now, we are required to consider the measures to enhance and to develop the most appropriate measures in response to the newly emerged situations of the marine environment for the sustainable use of the maritime areas. In fact, the negotiations for the UNCLOS started in 1973. It is 1 year after the Stockholm Declaration on Human Environment, which the Principle 7 explicitly refers the prevention of the marine pollution. In the 1970s and 60s probably, the pollution originating from vessels was one of the most serious concerns of the world, and the Marpol Convention was adopted as early as 1973. The provisions of the UNCLOS concerning the protection and preservation of the marine environment reflect these situations. As the second salient features of the UNCLOS, it is necessary to note that it is a framework convention, providing for the general rules and allowing other conventions to implement those obligations. Even before the UNCLOS, there were various regional conventions or conventions for specified purposes, as I have already mentioned to the Marpol Convention. Thus, it was very important for the UNCLOS to respect those pre-existing rules, but at the same time, it was necessary to encourage the further development of international legal rules. Therefore, the drafters of the UNCLOS intended that the regime established by the UNCLOS did not affect the pre-existing international mechanisms, and to encourage the people to think further about the maritime, the law of the sea. Therefore, the provisions concerning the environmental issues in the UNCLOS set out only framework rules. The last point to be noted in my context is that the obligations under the UNCLOS should be implemented by states parties through their national legal rules. In the process of national legislation, a state should be accountable to its internal society or civil society about the significance of the compliance with the obligations under conventions which it intends to ratify. And then, probably it is another important point, the provisions of the UNCLOS concerning the protection and preservation of the marine environment can principally be divided into two categories. One is the sets of the rules are provided in the respect for the obligations and duties in respective maritime areas. For example, the obligations of the coastal state in the exclusive economic zone, the duties of the flag state on the high seas, and the obligations to protect the marine environment in the activities in the area. The other principal set of duties and obligations are found in Part 12 under the title of the protection and preservation of the marine environment. So we have to notice this differentiation all the time. And then, in response to these framework rules, various conventions have been concluded for the protection and preservation of the marine environment and the conservation and management of the marine living resources, including the fisheries resources. In the case of the Marpol Convention, 5 annexes have been adopted and have entered into force. The Marpol Convention and the annexes have played a role to regulate the pollution from vessels as universal rules. For the conservation and management of fishery resources, after the adoption of the UNCLOS, the UN have made efforts to implement the general obligations for the conservation and management of the fishery resources. For example, the agreement for the implementation of the provisions of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea of 10 December 1982 relating to the conservation and management of the straddling fish stocks and highly migratory fish stocks. This is the typical example of the implementation convention. And also FAO has made the efforts to enhance the fights against the IUU fishing. It is the illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And typical and first attempt was the agreement to promote compliance with international convention and management, conservation and management measures by fishing vessels on the high seas. So these are the universal efforts, and in addition to the universal mechanisms, numerous regional agreements exist, both for the conservation and management of fishery and the protection and preservation of the marine resources. Since some of them have been concluded since UNCLOS, and in the case of others, the agreements existed before UNCLOS have been amended or enhanced by its new protocols or new conventions. Let me show you the map of the regional fisheries agreement. You may see almost all the maritime areas are covered by some sort of regional conventions. It is necessary to note that probably the environmental conventions or fisheries regulation conventions have covered every region in the world. And then, after this convention, at least I have to say that it is necessary to note that international rules for the conservation and management of fishery resources and those for the protection and preservation of the marine environment has developed separately, because those rules are separately provided in the UNCLOS. However, in the process of the significant development since UNCLOS with regard to the marine environment, the development of new scientific knowledge has been considered, and people have noticed the need for new measures and approaches. Probably I should note that one of those new ideas in the current circumstance is the proliferation of the idea that marine living resources, including fishery resources, constitute a part of the marine environment. Therefore, many of the fisheries conventions refers the necessity of the protection of the marine biodiversity or the ecosystem or precautionary approach. On the other hand, Probably the environmental conventions has already started refers to the protection of the marine biodiversity or that sort of things. So you may see the cross-references of certain salient obligations between the conventions of these two matters. And then not only the cross-references of certain salient obligations, some international organizations in respective areas have started the cooperation and coordination of their tasks. I should refer two examples. The IMO has expressed its concern about the IUU fishing in light of the flag states' control of fishing vessels. The 2012 Cape Town Agreement was adopted to support the fight against the IUU fishing. The IMO has also started the cooperative work with the FAO. As another example of the cooperation of regional organizations, I should note that the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission and the OSPAR Commission concluded a memorandum of understanding for cooperation and harmonization of their works. Another important change of the fundamental notion is that now we think that the issues concerning the marine environment is closely related to the global environment. Scientists have clarified the role of the ocean mechanism to the global environment. It is necessary for us to note that climate change and acid rain issues have influenced the marine environment as well. Therefore, we need some sort of new approaches. And then another new approach is the current movement in the United Nations. They are now talking about the protection of the biological diversity in the areas beyond the national jurisdiction, which is called ABNJ. And also in this context, it is one of the main issues is the utilization of the marine genetic resources. So, having seen the significant development of international legal rules for protection of the marine environment as a whole, I have to emphasize that those rules should be effectively complied with and implemented. In this last section, I'd like to discuss what are the important issues for the purposes of ensuring the effectiveness of those rules. Firstly, I should note that it is all the time the state parties which implement and comply with the legal rules provided by international conventions. Therefore, it is necessary for each state parties to legislate its own internal legal rules. It is also important for the international community to facilitate international cooperation among states, as they are sharing the common interest for the protection of the marine environment. But at the same time, probably we have to think about the involvement of private sectors. Because now we are living in the civil society, and of course it is necessary to require state parties to the conventions to implement by its internal legal rules, but at the same time, each state parties is required to be accountable for explain why it is important for that state to legislate a new law. Because now various conventions require some sort of economic burden or some sort of obligations owed by peoples. Therefore, it is necessary for us to entertain the people's interests in this issue. And it is very important for state parties to persuade their nationals or the people in its territory to think about the importance of international obligations. And for this purpose, I think it is very important to note the importance of the education of the people. Because for the people to be persuaded by the importance of the international obligations or the rules to ensure the common interest of the international community as a whole, people should understand why they have to pay some costs or they have to be regulated by the international legal rules. And for this purpose, to ensure the understanding of those people, I think education at every level, I mean for the education for the children, the students, and also the matured people, all these people should know the importance of the marine environment or the measures for the protection and preservation of the marine environment. And for this purpose, probably all the people who are interested in or who are involved in the issues of maritime affairs should cooperate. Therefore, as a public international lawyer, I would like to emphasize at the end of my talk, it is important to educate people and to know the importance of international legal rules. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariko. So that really sets the stage in terms of the overall sort of governance and the mechanisms, the framework conventions, and the specific regional and issue or sector-specific developments. And I think really leads into what I'd like to emphasize here now in terms of following on from your last slide about the role of the private sector. So let me go through that perspective to look at governance and the global ocean in the context of who all out there is operating in the ocean, which forms the constituency, the client, the compatriots that all of you in the shipping and port world need to be thinking about in terms of addressing these issues of governance, of maintaining ocean health and productivity, a clean ocean, with the context being the shipping and maritime and port industries cannot on their own ensure the health and productivity of the ocean because it's a multi-use ocean that you're sharing with a lot of others. And Mariko has highlighted some of these developments in the realm of governance and issues that are driving the stakeholders, the public, the governments, the international organizations to develop an increasing level of regulatory or policy or international treaty focus on tackling the ocean issues. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but these are the sort of things that have been adding up over the years and create an increasingly complex operating environment for the maritime industry and all of the other ocean industries. And so these challenges, though, are of course also opportunities for companies to think about. And so we work at the World Ocean Council in this sense of it's a global, multi-use ocean in which we've got growing kinds of use coming in, additional sectors such as seabed mining, of course renewables now being very well established and continuing to grow, but also the intensity, the duration, the geographic extent of business and economic activity in the ocean continue to expand as well. So with this heightened and expanding use of the ocean, we work to help the different sectors understand not only their global ocean map and their use and their aspirations and projections for economic activity, but those of the other sectors. And if you think about sort of overlaying these maps and looking at the global multiple use situation for the ocean, it really gets to be a complex and challenging situation. If you zoom in, for example, where things have been mapped in detail, such as the Irish Sea here as one example, and you start really putting together all of the uses that are going on, this is the kind of map that we end up with, and the drivers for then for things such as marine spatial planning or ocean zoning that really are being advocated and advanced in order to deal with this complex mix of uses. If you zoom back out to the global scale, this is the map of the ocean that, and I speak at a lot of different industry events, and I show this almost all the time. This is the global map of the ocean that you all need to be concerned about, because this is really illustrating or documenting that all of the ocean is impacted to one extent or another by human activity. And this is what's really driving the policy, the governance, the activist concerns that we collectively, the ocean business community, needs to engage on this and understand and work at this scale, which then really implies this need for and drives this need for multi-industry collaboration. And we've heard a lot about collaboration today, and the earlier session ended with this point about needing a broader platform to bring together at least ports and the shipping maritime sector. If you scale that out a bit to everyone that's operating in the ocean and these interactions and the cumulative effects, this is what's really been the set of conditions that no one company or no one sector, for all the good, smart people and good, smart companies that are working to tackle these ocean and environment and sustainability issues, it's going to require an effort that bridges the sectors and bridges the globe, spans the globe. And there had not been a private sector entity, an organization to pull together all these sectors around sustainable development, and that's what led to the formation of the World Ocean Council. So we, as a not-for-profit business organization, work to bring together leadership companies, big and small, across all the sectors from around the world to engage on a range of issues that I'll illustrate a bit more on, and particularly focusing on the governance aspects. So we've got a global network in the tens of thousands, and at the core of that, companies such as Yokohama Port and others that have joined explicitly as members to help drive forward this effort to bring the business and investment community together around ocean sustainable development, and, or as we say, corporate ocean responsibility. And importantly, this is driven by business imperatives, such as the need for ensuring stability and predictability in the operating environment and the synergies and economies of scale that can come from collaboration. So as this is developed, the World Ocean Council, just to spend a minute on who we are then, we've become recognized by a whole range of the UN agencies and international business organizations as the portal, the platform for this diverse global ocean business and industry and investment community to come together and engage at that global ocean scale. The sorts of things that have emerged from creating this broad coalition focused on industry leadership and collaboration and action are the sorts of cross-cutting areas here. Obviously, this now with the advent of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs provide a broad framework for that. And I won't go into these in detail, but these are the sorts of areas that companies and the different sectors have identified as ways in which to interact and really tackle these challenges that are increasingly pressuring companies and industry sectors to deal with their ocean footprint. We do physically bring together this growing global ocean business and investment community at the annual Sustainable Ocean Summit, which is coming up a month from now in Paris this year. Some of the key issues, and I'll highlight and have highlighted here that I'll go into a little bit more detail on ocean governance, but governance and marine planning, a series of cross-cutting multi-industry operational issues, and we heard a bit earlier before lunch about, for example, marine sound or ocean noise, and we'll hear more today about the plastics issues, the spread of invasive species. All of these are issues that cannot just be tackled by the port and shipping sectors. They need a broader effort engaging all of the sectors that are implicated in these. The marine mammals issues, we heard a bit about that also. And again, the need for all of the sectors that are implicated in those to be part of the solution. I'll also highlight the opportunities for increasing ocean knowledge, which is one of the specific components of Sustainable Development Goal 14 on the ocean, and then some of the other areas there that you see listed are program areas that have come out of this work to bring the different sectors together that we're engaging on. So if you want to get a sense of how complex the global ocean governance situation is, this is a partial wiring diagram of what all is going on out there. If I've got a pointer here, so you'll see IMO here in the middle, but that is not the entire universe of how the oceans are governed. There are all of these different entities under the UN context and even beyond, and Mariko has pointed out some of those, and the regional bodies, the Fishing and Agriculture Organization, the regional seas treaties. So it's a very complex mix that needs to be navigated to really, and needs to be watched to really see what's going on in terms of how governance is evolving. We've heard then about the law of the sea, but what I want to focus on that Mariko mentioned briefly was the BB&J, which I'll come to in a second. But just to point out that these kinds of governance policies and developments can come from seemingly out of nowhere. And this is one example of a regional effort that a number of governments got together and signed an agreement around the issue of the Sargasso Sea, and did not really engage industry to find out, well, actually, who's operating in that area? Is there a threat? Is there science that says there's a risk to the biodiversity and ecosystem of the Sargasso Sea? And went ahead with this and then pointed the finger at shipping as one of the key problems in that area, without really engaging the shipping industry in understanding how, if there was a problem, what the basis for that is and what could be done to work on it. So these are the sort of things that we need to be collaborating on across the sectors to make sure we're engaging constructively with governments as these sort of developments happen. So let me really highlight then the importance of what's happening right now. All of our governments are negotiating an amendment, essentially, to the law of the sea, as Mariko-san highlighted, on a biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. BB&J is the acronym, and we heard earlier today about the alphabet soup of all the acronyms out there. This is really, really important to the shipping industry, and I've been speaking at this at CMA and other of the shipping industry events. The negotiations are going on right now, and they have one more session. If you're operating a line, you should be concerned that there will soon be, in the high seas, requirements for environmental impact assessments. There will be a mechanism, secondly, to create area-based management. In other words, setting up marine protected areas or other kind of zoning in international waters. And in fact, at CMA earlier this year, Fred Keeney, head legal person at IMO, was saying this is the biggest development since the concept of freedom of navigation was promulgated. So it's really important to be actively and constructively engaged. And as I say, the final session for negotiating amongst all our governments is coming up early next year. And so there's an opportunity for all of you, and the International Chamber of Shipping has been engaged in this. We've been working to help. We've been there consistently over the past decade as this has been developing, and working to ensure there's an industry voice and presence, and working with the ICS and the International Chamber of Commerce to try and create a coalition of business input into this process as it moves forward. I'll leave this for and can provide this to anyone that's interested. There are a lot of implications, and I won't go into this in detail in the interest of time, but this is going to have a significant, this treaty is going to have a significant set of implications for how shipping, high seas fishing, deep sea mining, geophysical survey efforts, submarine cable, all move forward after this, as this treaty comes into agreement and effect. And with these kinds of potential costs. And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but this is really what you need to be aware of and concerned about. And I know everyone's focused on the sulfur cap and GHG, which is all incredibly important. And in terms of you being the folks that are operating in the ocean, I have to tell you, this is also very, very important and needs time and attention. And will be coming forward in one way or the other, whether or not shipping, maritime, and ports are at the table or not. So we're working to provide, in coordination with ICS and others, working to ensure the business community is involved and providing input, and we're looking at the next set of draft text coming out very soon so that we can really provide some detailed analysis and intelligence for everyone. Let me just jump ahead a bit. And the last point I wanted to make related to this broader sense of understanding the ocean and a positive, constructive role for industry, particularly shipping, is the opportunity to be involved in what many of us know as ships of opportunity programs. And so through one of the early interests that came up for the World Ocean Council as we got going was a variety of sectors saying, well, how can we be more involved in helping understand the ocean? And so we've created this program called Smart Ocean, Smart Industries to help foster and facilitate shipping, fishing, oil and gas, aquaculture, wind energy, et cetera, those that have vessels or platforms in the ocean to be involved in helping understand the ocean by hosting or deploying instruments that collect data, so ocean data, weather data, climate data, by sharing data that's already held by companies such as the geophysical survey companies and others, to bring that into the public science agencies, and we have an MOU, the World Ocean Council has an MOU with the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, with the World Meteorological Organization, with the International Hydrographic Organization, to help funnel the information that can come from this opportunity of industry getting involved in data collection and sharing into the international science community that can come back to the shipping industry and the port sector in the form of better forecasting and modeling of extreme weather events, for example, and there's nothing more fundamental than improving safety at sea and protecting lives and also protecting infrastructure and CapEx. So it's a real win-win opportunity, and I would encourage you, particularly those of you with fleets under your management, to think about how to get involved in that in partnership with these other sectors as we move forward with this. So I won't go into details here in terms of how we do that, but it is work that is going on with us brokering the relationship between the science community and companies to get instrumentation out on vessels, such as this example, for getting some real innovative tsunami detection instrument on ships in the Pacific that's really proving that it's workable as one example. So I'll stop there, and it really was to really help, I hope, get you to think about how important it is for industry to be thinking and working collectively on these governance issues and on the clean ocean issues that we are all being increasingly paying attention to and being forced by also other stakeholders to pay attention to. So we'll dive now into more detail around some of those issues with our next speaker, Tom Koyama, who is the corporate officer at NYK Line, will take us on to the next level of detail with his presentation. So please welcome Tom.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
First of all, congratulations on 160 years anniversary of Port of Yokohama. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you very much, Mariko-san, to invite me to this stage. And it's rather pity to say this, but I need to make a confession out here today. About 15 years ago, I did something I truly regret, something that I'm not really proud of, something I wish no one would ever know. Being a very ambitious captain of a big container ship, I had nearly had very big accident in Hong Kong water, which could have been a very big environmental disaster. Okay, story started November 2nd, 2005. In Geneva, Italy, when I joined one of our biggest container ship at the time, NYK as a captain. Yes, that was very first time for me to command the ship. From the day one I entered maritime school, it had been always my dream to be a captain of big containers. NYK with nearly 300 meters in length and carrying 8,000 plus units of containers, size is big enough to satisfy my desire. Like first time experience for anybody, I was too nervous to be a good captain. And I don't even remember how I maneuvered the ship, how I commanded 25 crew members on board for the first time, for the first week. But after several port calls in Mediterranean, followed by Suez Canal, Indian Ocean, and Malacca Strait transit, by the time I reached Busan, Korea, I start thinking, I may be able to make a good captain. And 2 weeks very hectic port rotation in Far East started. After Busan, I called Yokohama, this place, and Shimizu, Nagoya, Kobe, then Busan again, and Shanghai, Ningbo, Yanchang, Kaohsiung, Sheko, and finally I reached Hong Kong. Thanks to my colleagues who were responsible for scheduling, I experienced many anchorings, berthing, unberthing, foggy weather navigation, narrow channel navigation, river navigation, congested water navigation, and so on, within only 2 weeks, but no accident. Problem was, all the crew members, including myself, was severely tired, wanting to have a good sleep after departing Hong Kong, because we all knew that we would catch breath within a 3 days passage from Hong Kong to Singapore. So, when I finally departed Hong Kong in the dark, first thing I thought was to give my crew a good sleep as soon as possible, as a very good captain. Then I asked pilot to leave my ship earlier than usual. And I released junior officers and crew from bridge. Then I ring up engine. I ordered unmanned machinery space operation in the engine room, even though she is still in narrow traffic scheme. When my ship went down, like this, there are 2 cargo ships coming closer from my port side. Regulation tells that I will stand on ships which shall maintain the speed and course, as you know well. And on top of that, I was in the traffic scheme. I was confident that this 2 other ships will give me the way. But time goes by, and we are closing each other. There's no sign of giving me the way. So I get scary, and I start giving flashlights, quick flashlights, and whistle blow to alert them. Nothing changed. And VTIS officer starts shouting to me, "You are in danger, you are in danger." I know, already know. But look at this. There's no space for me to turn around on the starboard side. You cannot turn to port according to regulations. And with speed, ring up engine. No man in engine room. Speed is already more than 16 knots. After engine order will not work. Jesus, why should I encounter this situation? I should have kept the pilot longer. I should have kept my officers longer. I should have kept standby engine for emergency maneuvering. And all too late. The idea of turning to starboard gave me this idea, and giving us the engine to the huge engine with speed of more than 16 knots doesn't work. Then she will collide anyway, like this. Within a split second, I start thinking, I shouldn't have made a captain. I shouldn't have made entered the Maritime College. I shouldn't have joined NYK line. I even started blaming my father, who was always encouraged me to go to maritime school. VTIS officer still shouting. Finally, I thought, I will collide with this ship anyway. So juries will be criticized me on the court if I don't use the Aston engine. Then I decided, give an order, full Aston engine to the chief officer. All the bridge team was very silent, no impact. I just prayed. Finally, Astra engine activated, luckily, with screaming noise and much vibration. But anyway, too late. She doesn't slow down, and ships are closing each other, and we will collide. Just we are waiting for the moment of collision. Then, all of a sudden, those crossing ships took a sharp starboard turn, right turn, like this, and we passed by port side to port side safely, with a distance of minimum one that we could have made a shake hands physically. And I went to the port wing of the ship and shouted very loudly, as much as possible, "No." This was my first time. And the last, I shouted 4 little words in the presence of others. Thank God, we are safe. It could have been a massive environmental disaster. And I truly learned overconfidence or complacency is no. Of course, I learned at the same time, safe operation can only be achieved with a close collaboration of all the parties concerned. Talking about the clean water protection and safe operations, many people are still thinking that the ship-generated oil or shipborne oil is a major cause of the oil pollution, or operation of the ships are inherently very harmful to the environment. But I must say here, the shipping community has been making tremendous effort in raising up the quality of operations in order to protect our clean ocean. Let's look at the serious pollution cases from the ships and how much maritime industry responded to those to make improvements in operations. In 1967, we have Torrey Canyon case. And obviously, it was one of the most famous and serious shipwreck and oil pollution case happened off the west coast of Cornwall, England. Torrey Canyon case made people at the time understand the risk of pollution by ship, which led to the establishment of International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, which is MAPO, as Mariko-san explained. In 1989, Exxon Valdez caused massive oil pollution in Prince Wales, Alaska. Exxon Valdez incident is still considered to be the biggest oil pollution from ship in human history. As this happened in US territory, and it did harm and destroy the beautiful Alaska environment and ecosystem, the voice of anti-pollution in the US became so huge that the following year, the United States introduced Oil Pollution Act of 1990, it's famous OPA 90, making it mandatory for all tankers to come to United States to be a double hull. The IMO followed suit shortly after by introducing new international requirements for the double hulling of oil tankers. So this shows a single hull and double hull. And studies shows that depending on impact speed, the extra layer, right side, can reduce the likelihood of marine pollution following an incident that damaged ship's hull by more than 60% when compared to single hull structure. Even though this double hulling regulations took into force in early 80s, many of old generation tankers continue to exist, as building of new double hull tanker is very costly for any ship owners. On January 2nd, a happy days in Japan, in 1997, Nahotoka, 27 years old, broke into two because under rough sea at Sea of Japan. And Erika, 25 years old, also broke into two in Bay of Biscay on December 1999. As both ships are very old, 27, 25 years old, and the incidents were just caused by rough sea, leading to huge oil spills, huge oil pollution. So discussions were initiated in international shipping that accelerated phase-out scheme of the single-hull tanker to be established. And control of ships by class society must be enhanced, and port-to-state control must be enhanced. As you know, port-to-state control scheme was introduced in early 80s by IMO in response to successive ship incident with flag of convenience. This ship inspection scheme by port state contributed a lot in kicking out substandard vessels from the industry. Although strict inspection scheme and occasional detention orders to the ship truly challenged ship owners. July 1st, 1998 was truly epoch for maritime industry as International Safety Management Code was introduced. The code regulates, for the first time in maritime history, operational software of ship management, rather than hardware, as was the case for then existing regulations. The code introduced the concept of the responsible company and also the concept of safety management system, SMS, with a scheme of external, internal audit on top of historical hardware inspections. The concept was further enhanced by SIRE TMSA scheme by oil industry. As you know, SIRE is ship inspection and TMSA is company operated by oil major companies. And happy combination of these, PSC, ISM, SIRE, TMSA, was to reform rather irresponsible shipping industry at the time into one of transparency and credibility. With this movement and louder voice of corporate social responsibility in the 80s, ship owner has been putting more and more effort on operational quality improvement, which includes enhanced crew training, more risk assessment on operations, more precise procedures, management involvement in PDCA cycles, and so on. As a result, a number of oil spills incidents has decreased significantly over the last few decades. This shows the reduction is 92% from 70s to up to now. It's a quite achievement, isn't it? And, oh, what is she wearing? Is she happy with wearing this plastic coat? As mentioned, oil pollution by ships has been much reduced to a minimum with the tremendous effort by all related stakeholders of shipping, such as ship owner, ship managers, crew, IMO, flag state, port state, class society, cargo owners also. But plastic garbage and microplastic issues are newly emerging problem that challenge us all. Nobody's happy with this scenery, but who is responsible? It's a pity some people are still blaming seafarers. I don't know how many of you or how many of the people in the world can tell the difference between pirates and seafarer. That pirate, this is seafarer, good guy. And many people are still thinking, seafarers are not well educated and lacking common sense, so probably it's only natural for seafarers to throw the plastic bin to the oceans. But reality is, late 90s, we started crew training for segregation of garbage on board in response to the requirement of MARPOL. At the same time, even nowadays, at the time and even nowadays, many of the crew members' home country do not have a concept of garbage segregation. So it took time to make them understand and make them toe the line by continual training and educations. But I think our training to seafarers has some positive impact, positive influence to their family and their local community in terms of environmental consciousness. So our activities look very small, but collective contribution over the years may not be ignored. Nowadays, many of the ship managers and ship owners prohibit buying normal mineral water in plastic bottles you have on the table. It's prohibited on board. In order to happily encourage crew to drink ship-generated water, some companies supply these cool metal bottles, each and every crew. So please prohibit waters. And although garbage is nicely collected and segregated on board, that must be discharged at some ports. Otherwise, ship itself, in the end, would become big garbage bin. However, it should be highlighted that some of the ports constantly refuse to receive the garbage from ships. Therefore, we sometimes are forced to retain the garbage nearly 2 years until dry docking. What do you think it induces? Illegal dumping. It's not only garbage that we want to discharge at ports. Oil sludge and oily water, which are byproducts of heavy fuel oil-operated engines. Those are also to be discharged at ports, but we also have a difficulty in finding a suitable port to discharge. I understand every port state has their version of difficulty in taking care of garbage, especially countries which are very small in size are more difficult to receive oil or garbage from ships. But we, ship alone, cannot cope with this situation. We need the support of ports and port states to keep our ocean clean. Let us raise a voice from Yokohama to pursue better collaboration between ship, port, and port states. Container storage calculations is another area that we need cooperation of ports. Wrong container weight information as well as inappropriate storage calculation will lead to insufficient stability or insufficient strength of hull, which can lead to container dropping onto seas, ship break into two, or ship capsize, all of which will surely do harm to the environment. In order to solve this, not only ports, but also shippers' support is inevitable. All in all, clean ocean cannot be achieved only by the effort of single player. I hope with the combination of mutual support and collaboration, we'll be able to maintain or keep beautiful ocean and ports. Way forward, nowadays, autonomous car driving has become more and more popular with the participation of GAFA in developing. In shipping industry, we're also very keen in developing autonomous ship. At NYK, our captains and chief engineers are actively participating in the development of autonomous ship together with the manufacturers. Because we are the people who has hands-on information, hands-on experience of the navigation as well as the engine operations. What kind of impact will autonomous ship has to the environment? As this is still development stage, I cannot guarantee how much we can do, but we may say that autonomous technology will make safer ship with reducing human element. Zero CO2 emissions with electric propulsion. zero oily water, oily sludge with electric propulsion. Maybe zero garbage, if nobody on board. So you can see many more. This is a list of shipping companies who are keen in environmental management. Please understand, we are not sitting up there. We are trying our best to pay our dues. Okay, let's wrap up. Number one, maritime industry took considerable and reasonable effort for the last 40 years for improving operational quality, by which the number of incidents has been much reduced. Number two, for controlling garbage, the support of port and port states are inevitable, also including oily water. Number three, even for ship safety, the contributions of ports, shippers, and other parties are also important. Number four, autonomous technology, autonomous ship will surely reduce negative impact to the environment in future. All these suggest that with the collaboration of all the parties, all the stakeholders concerned, we can make a big change, which has been proved in the reduction of oil pollution. I believe that human being has conscience, which distinguish ourselves from the animal. So I'm confident that all the stakeholders, all the concerned parties will be able to collaborate on the issues of environment in order to keep our ocean clean. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Captain, for that very thorough and sort of uplifting message in terms of progress and the way forward. Next, we'd like to invite Professor, thank you, Atsuhiko Isobe, professor at the Kyushu University, to dive in deeper on the plastics issue for us. So please, welcome the professor. Thank you.
I appreciate for giving me an opportunity to introduce a research project, research program here. And my topic, the topic that I can introduce here is ocean plastics. So these pictures were taken by me at the in the remote island of Japan. You can find that a huge amount of the plastic occupied beaches, and this marine plastic debris made damage to the wildlife and the seabirds in the ocean, or damage to the beauty of the beaches. And this large plastic is gradually degraded and gradually fragmentized to the very small plastic debris. So when the plastic debris became a very tiny plastic with a size smaller than 5 millimeter, we call them as microplastics. So generation of the microplastics are detected over the world on the beaches, over the world. Now we have at the present time, we have two risks of these microplastics in the ocean, especially in ecosystem in the oceans. First, microplastic absorbs the persistent organic pollutant, such as PCBs, over their surfaces. And as you know, the microplastic is very, very small fragment and very easily to be ingested to the marine organism. So this means that the persistent organic pollutants are carried into the marine organism with plastics, with marine plastics. Thereafter, the persistent organic pollutants dissolved. So this means that the move from plastic to the organ of the marine organism. This is one of the risks. Another risk is toxicity of non-toxic plastics. So this means that we have so many laboratory experiments. At the present time, many researchers over the world conducted experiments in which they added the small plastic pieces to the water tank. Water tank with aquatic organisms and investigate how the plastic beads damages the aquatic or marine organism in the tank. So this figure summarizes plenty of investigation experiments. So this axis means the concentration of the microplastic beads added to the water tank with a unit of milligram per cubic meter. And this axis means the particle diameter. And we plot each mark at which aquatic biota shows some damage. Damage has many kinds of the damage. One, the increase of the mortality, and oxidative stress, and metabolic rate, and decrease of growth rate, feeding activity, and reproduction. And so we have so many kinds of the damages. And you can find that so many laboratories show about if the concentration of the microplastic become higher than 1 gram per cubic meter. So 1 gram per cubic meter, the many kinds of the aquatic biota, marine biota show the damages. So important thing is whether or not this level of the concentration will be is now realized in the actual ocean or will be realized in the future oceans. So the Ministry of Environment Japan decided to monitor the microplastic around Japan Island from 2014, 5 years before. Now we have about 100 stations around Japan Island, and using the 5 vessels belonging to the Hokkaido University and Tokyo University of Marine Science and Technology, and Kagoshima University and Nagasaki University joined this observational cruise. In each cruise, in each vessel, we towed this kind of the net to collect the floating microplastic in the oceans, upper oceans. This net has a mesh size of about 300 micrometer. So the microplastic presented here is defined as a small plastic fragment with a size larger than 300 micrometer to smaller than 5 millimeter. And okay, this is the result. This is the result of the observation to date. The largest particle means the concentration of the microplastic is 100 pieces per unit cubic meter of the seawater volume. You can find, we have an observational station here, but it's very difficult to find the huge amount of the microplastic south of Japan. The huge amount of the microplastic appeared around Japan, so we are surrounded by the microplastics. So in general, the concentration of the microplastic is very, very high in the East Asian seas. We should note this fact. Okay, this figure shows a comparison with a comparison of the microplastic concentration among the different oceans. So we can find that so concentration of the microplastic in the East Asian Sea become 1 million pieces per square kilometer. But however, the average of the world become about 10% of the concentration of the East Asian seas. So again, I wish to emphasize that we are in a hotspot of marine plastic pollution. We have conducted observational cruise from Antarctica to Tokyo 3 years before to compare the microplastic concentration over the world. So in short, the concentration of the microplastic in the Southern Ocean and the South Pacific is about 10,000 pieces per square kilometer. 10,000, yes. But if we move to the North Pacific around the equator, the concentration becomes one order of magnitude higher than that of the Southern Ocean. And if we approach to Japan, approach to the East Asian seas, the magnitude again becomes one order of magnitude higher than that of the North Pacific. So this means that the concentration of the microplastic becomes million pieces per square kilometer. So again, I wish to emphasize that we are surrounded by the hotspot of the marine plastic pollution. We are hotspot by the ocean plastics. Now we conducted the computer simulation to forecast the marine plastic amount, marine plastic abundance in the upper ocean in about after 50 years. After 50 years, over the North Pacific. So this simulation, we use the modeled particles representing microplastics. And you can find, on the background, we added ocean current and wind waves to move the microplastics. So this animation shows the microplastic distribution, microplastic behavior at the present time. Now we extend this computation to the 50 years after. If we don't have any regulation to reduce the plastic in everyday life. Okay, this is the result. The upper panel show the microplastic abundance at the present time. The distribution is not homogeneous. The microplastic concentration are very high at the mid-latitude over the North Pacific. And after 50 years, the microplastic concentration became very high, and this dense red area shows the microplastic concentration with about 1 gram per cubic meter. So this means that in 50 years after, we may encounter the ocean with a concentration at which marine biota may show damages. However, we have to note our limitation. We have to note our limitations. So as I said, our microplastic observations are conducted by using the net taught by the vessel. A net has a mesh size with 300 micrometers. And we reproduce the microplastic concentration by the computer simulation by using the observational data as a validation to confirm the accuracy of our numerical model. So this means that our numerical model, our numerical simulation, our computer simulation has a target of the microplastic larger than 300 micrometers. But as you know, as you can see, this kind of laboratory experiment uses the microplastic much more smaller, with a size with a magnitude 2 or 3 order of magnitude smaller than that we observed. So this means that we have so many large gaps in sizes between the laboratory and observation and numerical model. So it's at the present time, it's very difficult to be conclusive for the oceanic risk, environmental risk of the microplastics. Because of these limitations, we have to breach this size gap. Okay. Oh, I will finish too short. Okay, but no problem. Okay, this is I summarize my talk towards the sustainable reduction of the plastic in the world based on the sciences, not based on the economics, but based on the emotion, based on the sciences. Okay, first, we have to elucidate marine plastic circulations. Marine plastic circulation is a very new terminology, very new jargon. So this means that the generation of the microplastic, transport of the microplastic, and removal of the microplastic over the world oceans. This means that the microplastic is not eternally exist in the ocean. Some microplastics settle down into the deep ocean or absorb in the sandy beaches and absorb in the sea ices. We have, at the present time, we could not trace, we could not chase, we could not understand. So for entire plastic circulation in the world, we have to elucidate marine plastic circulation. And we have to observe the microplastic much more intensively over the world ocean. Otherwise, we cannot monitor how the ocean was contaminated by the plastics at the present time and in the future. And of course, the risk assessment of the microplastic is very important. We need much more laboratory experiment to elucidate the risk of the plastics in the oceans. And of course, one of the important solutions to combat marine plastic issue is to develop the environmentally friendly materials instead of plastics. I'm not sure what is new. So I'm not sure the new technology, but this one solution should be the environmentally friendly materials instead of the plastics. So we have so many things to do more to the sustainable reduction of the plastic in the world. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Atsuhiko. And really focusing on the role of science and data and risk assessment to help really clarify problems. Now we'll switch gears a little bit and really look at some of the solution efforts that are emerging. We have, I'd like to welcome Paul Taylor, Global Head of Shipping and Offshore for Societe Generale, to the podium. And please welcome Paul, and we'll hear about how the finance community is engaging on some of the key challenges that the maritime industry faces. Paul.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for watching that short video. The Poseidon Principles launched in New York in June, and I was actually quite surprised about the huge media interest in the Poseidon Principles, in the launch itself. And maybe I shouldn't have been, I don't know, but we had over 500 global articles in the first 24 hours after launch, and I think that just showed that actually it was quite surprising to see a bank-led climate alignment initiative, and it's very much the first of its kind for a sector-specific climate alignment initiative. So it's quite a groundbreaking initiative, and I think it goes to show the power of and the strength of a coalition of banks actually coming together to actually embrace change and actually help enforce change. So it goes to show that individually, as banks, we have very little power. We just lose market share if we do anything individual. But actually together, there's huge power and initiative. The video you've just seen shows you everything that's good and bad in shipping. Clearly, it's a global and growing industry, but at a cost. And at a cost, you saw the video saying about 2% of world's emissions, growing to maybe 15 if we do nothing and it's business as usual. Now, what can banks do to help change this situation? The answer is an awful lot. There's about $400 billion of senior debt to finance ships across the world, and that excludes the Chinese leasing companies that are becoming an increasingly big player. And that's across about 70,000 financed vessels. So actually, what that tells us is that in collaboration, banks actually have a huge role to play. That if we show that we care about the vessels we finance, we care about the impact they have on the environment, we can actually have quite a loud common voice. And that's the purpose behind the Poseidon Principles. And the idea is that we are part of the solution. You know, we can actually embrace change and be part of it. It's much better to be in the driving seat to actually help steer change rather than be a passenger and go at somebody else's speed and in someone else's direction. And that, again, is very much the idea behind the Poseidon Principles, to actually self-regulate. Do it now ourselves or be regulated by somebody else. And Societe Generale, who I work for, is delighted to be one of the initial signatories of the Poseidon Principles, and I'm delighted to be the Vice Chairman today of that. Now, SG is not the only signatory, of course. There's actually 12 others today, all leading international shipping banks, with an aggregate shipping portfolio of over $100 billion out of the 400. So we have about 25% of the market so far. And that we're all making the same commitment, which I'll explain in a second. There's many other banks looking at becoming a signatory. So far, we have 12 European banks and 1 US bank. So we don't have an Asian bank, and we are very keen to have several signatories from Asia. After all, it is the center of the shipping world. So we are, I say we, that's myself, but with the other signatories and the Global Maritime Forum, we're lobbying other banks across the world, particularly in Asia, as well as governments as well. And we're hopeful that in the coming months that this will become a market standard and that all leading responsible shipping banks will become a signatory. So what's the aim of the Poseidon Principles? You've seen the video, but they're a framework for assessing and disclosing the climate alignment of shipping portfolios. We're all making the same commitment to annually measure the CO2 footprint of the vessels in our lending portfolios. And we're committing to reporting these. So we measure them against the IMO's trajectory for carbon emissions, and then we annually report these emissions. What we actually report is the delta between the emissions in our portfolio weighted against the loan outstanding and the IMO trajectory that reduces over time. We're making the commitment to reduce our carbon emissions because we want to be aligned with the IMO. The IMO to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by 2050, which might not sound a particularly ambitious aim, but actually it is, because that's an absolute level. And if you want to look at it with a growing global shipping fleet, which could at least double in that time between now and 2050, we're looking actually at more like an 85% reduction in relative ship-by-ship emissions. So this is why it's rather important and a meaningful initiative. Not a very exciting slide, you may say. This is what we're measuring, the annual efficiency ratio. The analysis methodology of the Poseidon Principles is indeed the annual efficiency ratio. Not necessarily everybody's favorite one, but this is the one the IMO uses to measure efficiency on the ships. It's looking at the deadweight tonnage of the ship, it's ignoring cargo, and that gets some criticism. But the reason why, for the Poseidon Principles, we're using the AER is because we want to align ourselves with the IMO at the current time. So this measures the CO2 emissions per ton mile of any vessel over 5,000 deadweight tons. Now, what we're doing here is the trajectory. By measuring each vessel, and you can see here a pretend portfolio of 5 vessels, 2 of which are compliant and 3 of which are not compliant with the IMO. But by measuring each vessel on the portfolio, we can see which vessels are compliant and which are non-compliant. And by weighting the AER of each vessel with the size of the loan outstanding, we can compare the delta, and you can see that on the graph here. And the delta, so plus or minus 10% or whatever the figure is the only figure that is reported by the banks in their public sustainability reports. But what this will do is it'll allow the banks who have signed to better understand the climate change, or the impact that climate change has on their portfolios, and this will lead to us being able to not just monitor and measure, but actually manage the risk as well, which is very important. So by signing the Poseidon Principles, we're taking a strong position on climate alignment, but one which is entirely consistent with other climate commitments that the bank and other banks have made, and they're consistent with the IMO. So they're consistent with commitments such as the Paris Agreement and the 2-degree investing initiative. They're also consistent with the Principles for Responsible Banking and the Katowice commitment. Also the Getting to Zero Coalition, which was recently launched in New York back in September. But also consistent with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And incidentally, I think it was last week, there was an article in the Financial Times, the FT, which reported that many big Japanese companies, including Mazda, Sony, and Nomura, were actually complying with the TCFD at a faster rate than their European and US counterparts. So that's great, and so let's also sign up to the Poseidon Principles as well. So all Japanese banks present, please do sign. Okay, so what are the Poseidon Principles? Of course, what I've said is that we're committing to measure the CO2 emissions of our portfolio, but it goes way beyond that, really, in real life. So in addition to greater transparency and accountability of our own activity, there are indeed important business considerations here, and climate alignment will now be an important consideration for us in all credit decisions. Ship owners, further to the launch of the Poseidon Principles, ship owners are already accepting a loan covenant for new transactions, obliging them to provide basic emissions data on their vessels. All they have to do is provide data on the miles sailed and the type and amount of fuel that was being used. And this becomes a regulatory requirement, of course, in about 10 weeks' time, on the 1st of January 2020, and banks are purely requesting the same information. So nothing to be worried about at all, I can assure you. But what we can do through the Poseidon Principles is demonstrate our desire to partner our clients. This is not a stick by any means, it's more of a carrot. Our desire to partner them as they embark on unprecedented technological change, which will see them having to invest in new technology, in vessels with new fuels, such as LNG, of course, maybe in some bio or synthetic form, and maybe, who knows, hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, whatever becomes commercially available in future. The banks who have signed the Poseidon Principles genuinely want to partner our clients. After all, we have to. If we want to now comply with the Poseidon Principles and remain compliant, we need to finance this new technology going forwards. Now, an inevitable impact of the Poseidon Principles in this world of finite capital within banks is that there'll be more bank liquidity available for the greener investments, the ones which are supporting the energy transition. And that's exactly what we want to do. Conversely, there may be less liquidity available for the refinancing of older, less efficient assets. And older assets don't necessarily mean less efficient, but there is some correlation, as well as the speed, the time spent in port, etc. But we will now be looking very carefully at that going forwards. After all, we clearly want what is reported in our sustainability reports to be a positive story, i.e. a negative figure. Now, next steps. The Poseidon Principles are an initiative by responsible banks for responsible ship owners. So we urge everybody to sign up. The first reporting will be at the end of 2020, based on 2019 information, data, including loan outstandings. The aim, of course, is for the Poseidon Principles to become a market standard. A market standard for all banks to be a member of, but also a market standard covenant in all loan documentation. So they're just the first step today. That's what all we've done so far. It's a positive one. And I'd say the feedback so far has been largely positive. Positive amongst banks, very positive in the media, superly positive amongst governments, particularly the European ones, and amongst ship owners, generally positive, but a little bit of concern, particularly ones maybe who have older vessels which they want to keep going for longer. And I do understand that. But we need to continue to lobby banks. We need to lobby the banks. We need to lobby the export credit agencies. We need to lobby the Chinese lessors, the Japanese lessors. We want them all to sign up and make it a market standard. After all, Asia is the heart of the industry. So today, the Poseidon Principles are purely focusing on decarbonisation. We decided to keep it to one theme to kickstart it, but there's absolutely no reason why it won't go on. It has the scope to consider other social impacts. An obvious one would be the green recycling of ships, and that's already been discussed within the working groups within the Poseidon Principles Association as to whether that should be brought in at some point in time. So my final point is that it's not often that the shipping industry is used as a benchmark for other industries. We're not always a first mover. But the small step that the banks that are signed, the small step that they've taken today actually is the first step, I think, for maybe the shipping sector and the Poseidon Principles to maybe be used as some form of benchmark for other industries, and that would be a really great thing. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. That was a great update on that really exciting initiative and program as it really gets underway. So what we have now is, and we've had a huge amount of content there and some great presentations that to consider. And so we are honored to have Kathy Stanzel, Managing Director for INTERTANKO, here to sort of pull some threads together, some cross-cutting themes and priority issues out of all that we've heard. And Kathy needs no introduction, I think, having been with us all yesterday and leading some of the sessions. So I'll hand it over to Kathy to give her thoughts on some key issues here.
Thank you, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I don't want to stand between you and the panel, effectively, because there's some great questions coming in on Slido, and I think we should probably look at those in a minute. But I just thought it was really interesting that what we've done in this session so far is we've zoomed all the way out, we've looked at the law of the sea, and I think Mariko introduced this wonderful principle of accountability, because ultimately, and not just at state level, but at individual level, and we've then zoomed into that accountability topic. And I think hearing from a true shipping professional about what pollution means, and then zooming further in and looking at the types of pollution. From my perspective, of course, being part of the shipping industry, there are so many things we are doing that we've actively done over the years, and they start with looking at the VOCs, for example, on tankers. We were venting them to atmosphere years ago. We don't do that anymore. There's lots of things we've cleaned up, and it really starts at a very small level, looking at environmentally friendly lube oils that don't pollute the environment, that are biodegradable, which is causing no end of problems, because of course marine bugs love to eat them because they're biodegradable, right? So you put them in the stern tube, you try and seal something with it, it gives you problems. So from the smallest, we're trying to figure that out, to much bigger, what Saito-san mentioned yesterday, trying to use anti-fouling paints that don't contain components that are harmful to the environment, to then zooming out even further and saying, let's stop bioinvasions by treating our ballast water, to being accountable on a global scale for our greenhouse gas emissions. And this is the topic of the whole event so far. So I think the ecosystem approach that we're now taking in this industry, the collaborative approach that we're now taking in this industry, and we've heard about it in the port session this morning, which I think is absolutely instrumental. The more we work together, and whether it's also now finance supporting that work together, upholding the same principles that we as citizens of this planet effectively need to act by individually and collectively, it's fantastic. So I think, Paul, I don't want to take any more time because I know we're a little bit pressed, so let's jump into the questions.
Right, so thank you for that, Kathy. And so what we'd like to do is, and we've got some questions here, and I encourage those of you that have some additional thoughts or comments or questions to submit those through Slido. And so what I'd like to do is building on these points that Kathy has made, and what we've heard is to put to the panel some of these cross-cutting points for us to dive in a little bit deeper on. And I think one of the to me, in terms of these issues, the variety of impacts that emanate from the maritime industry and ports, from the operations, and there's no avoiding that human activity causes impacts. I think the issue of risk assessment based on good science and good data that leads to practical solutions, where we've got a partnership between science, industry, and regulators to ensure that we understand what kind of information is needed, how that's collected, how it's analyzed, and that leads to then the sort of practical solutions, and where necessary, as came up in the other panel, good regulation really sets the floor and drives responsiveness and engagement by industry and innovation. To put to the panel, do you feel that for these complex issues in this global marine environment, this global ocean that's 71% of the planet, so we've got challenges for having the kinds of data we need, and then if we look at the atmospheric side of it, an even bigger global commons, do you feel there are some, are we connecting well enough between the industry drivers and the kinds of data that's needed to produce the good risk assessment that then leads to the regulatory developments that can help solve these problems and be implemented with industry being an active and enthusiastic partner? So I'd put that out as an open sort of cross-cutting point to any of you. We could start with Mariko if you're interested, or...
Can I jump in?
Yeah, so Kathy, go ahead.
Because I have a question actually that follows exactly from that.
Okay.
And it's Isobe-san. Isobe, your research at the moment, you're looking at microplastics. What proportion of those microplastics you're looking at are effectively the product of degradation of plastic garbage, and what percentage is introduced through cleaning products, micro beads in cosmetics, and those problems? Are you looking at both, or is it purely garbage you're looking at?
Basically, almost all microplastics are made from the marine plastic debris, not the plastic beads. I mean, the plastic bead is the man-made microplastic, for example, scrub in cleanser or such kind of the man-made microplastic is very small fraction. So usually this kind of the microplastic fragmentized in the beach is the major part. So our observation is so focus on such kind of the microplastic generated on the beach in natural.
And is the way you're receiving data sufficient?
Not sufficient because this is very important things because the microplastic research is started about within these 10 years. So almost all scientists over the world does not concern with the plastic debris, especially for the small plastic debris. But in recent 10 years, this 10 years, many researchers started their work. So we have not yet established observational procedures for the microplastic research. So one very important keyword of the microplastic research is standardization or harmonization to measure the microplastic. We start at this point at the present time.
Thank you, Atsuhiko. Other comments on this point about data and linkage from data to risk assessment to understanding impacts and policy and development or other kinds of initiatives?
Yeah, because whenever we talk about environmental impact assessment, as you said, in the discussion of the BB&J, probably the environmental impact assessment is one of the most important issues. But at the same time, when we think about the environmental impact assessment, but in some cases, we do not have the sufficient data for the current status or the former status of the maritime areas. For example, when we think about the exploration and exploitation of the mineral resources on the seabed or deep seabed, in the area, sometimes we do not know the current status. We lack the sufficient data for the current status. And that's a difficulty of the discussion about the environmental impact assessment. And also, I guess that it might be very difficult to think about the impacts of human activities. Because is it all right for us to think about only the impact to the living resources in the maritime region, or the water column, or the environment as such? Probably in the case of the law of the sea or impact assessment in the maritime areas, it is another difficult and challenging thing to think about, I guess.
And so, Captain Koyama, do you think from an operational perspective that companies such as NYK really are able to move forward with the kinds of information that's coming out to really take a company level leadership, or do you think that the Lions are really more interested in waiting for a kind of a broader platform with a group of companies to be able to really tackle some of these up and coming issues, like the plastics issue, which is a little bit handled already, well, not a little bit, but quite a bit, handled already through MARPOL, but some of these more emerging issues that we've heard about and that we're certainly hearing about through the World Ocean Council, such as ocean noise or marine sound and other issues. How do you see that from a company level perspective in terms of what we know and what a company could and should be doing?
Yes, I think we should be always proactive in response to those requirements. And but as a shipping company, generally speaking, we just follow the regulation determined by IMO or any other organizations. And also, of course, we are always eager to participate in the rule-making process in IMO. That's very important, because otherwise, for the rule-makings, they probably forget about the voice of the, shipping company or seafarers. So that's why we always wanting to participate in the rule making, and because always the ship owner and seafarers are very downstream of those discussions, and somebody decide the rules, we just follow. But sometimes we find the rule itself is very half-baked. And I hate to say this, but for example, the rule regulation for a ballast water management system, and this is a sulfur cap. There are many loopholes by which there are some winners and losers just following the regulations. I think this is wrong. Just the rule itself gives some room, which is option for ship owners. So this sulfur cap issue is a very important, very prominent one. So if you choose the scrubber installation or not, so that directly leads to the winner or loser game. So we don't like to see that situation. That's why we'd like to involve in more rule making. And for that matter, so I think we need more dialogues between all the stakeholders, not shipping companies, but not only rule makers, but our customers and banks. And also, that's why Paul's presentation was very interesting for me. So the environment for all human beings on the earth. So all the people should get together and discuss and decide. Otherwise, and scientific evidence is very important. But as Mariko-san said, there are many things which is uncertainty or unknown. And as Isobe-san said, many things are still in the process. But in the process, even in the process or unknown, we should not stop it. We should go forward under the agreement by all the stakeholders. So that's why keeping good dialogue is very important, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think all of us in the room would be very much in agreement with that. I think one of the interesting aspects of this, though, is what is the basis for that dialogue and what constitutes agreement. And in some instances there's differences of opinion. And now we're seeing also where the industry, and I'm seeing this in other sectors outside maritime, where there are external forcing factors, and the actual ocean user and creator of the impact is being kind of pushed into action. And so I'll come to Paul here in a second with this. So you mentioned scrubbers, and so for example, we have now some ports who are outlawing the use of open loop scrubbers and the discharge of the residue. And now we also have the finance community coming in to say, well, we're going to play our role to help kind of set the agenda and move it along. So Paul, do you feel that the shipping community, the industry is receptive to this, or is it all peace and harmony, or are there some challenges to developing that kind of external driver to change?
Yeah, I think if it was peace and harmony, it probably wouldn't be worth much. So I think it's been very well received, the Poseidon Principles, on the whole. As I said in my short presentation, there are some ship owners who are probably a little bit concerned about what it means for them if they would like to continue to not just operate older vessels going forward or less efficient vessels, but actually seek refinance. So I do understand that it won't be total peace and harmony, but generally the aim of the principles are to bring everybody together. We all have a role here. We all have a responsibility. It's not just the role of the shipping companies to meet 2050 targets. If you look at the Getting to Zero coalition that launched in New York in September, I found that very interesting. The first meeting that took place was, it brought together banks, ship owners, oil companies, charterers, classification societies, and the general discussion was that it's everybody's responsibility here. If we work together, then there's a chance that we'll get to 2050 and comply altogether. For example, a ship owner, if we're expecting them to invest in 12 LNG-powered or bio-LNG-powered vessels or hydrogen-powered vessels, they probably want to know that finance is available. They probably want to know that there's a charterer and someone will take a risk on them. It's not just down to the ship owner. So I'd say it's a combined responsibility. And as I said earlier, banks, We have a large capital outlay. We have to, and we have a right to, know what the impact is of the vessels we finance on the environment. So we certainly have a big role to play.
Thank you. I think this really illustrates the way in which these things evolve, and a group of diverse but connected stakeholders can come together to really create a broad framework and a strategic movement towards significant change, and certainly the active engagement of proactive and progressive companies from the shipping and port and maritime industry more broadly are essential to making that kind of coalition possible. And these sort of events that bring us together are really essential for creating the relationships and having the discussions that can really advance that sort of cooperation and constructive engagement and progress. So we're unfortunately out of time, but certainly would encourage all of you to be in touch with any of the panelists here on the particular issues and information that they brought forward. And again, we'd like to congratulate the Port of Yokohama on 160 years and the organizers here for really bringing us all together, and Sakura for keeping us organized and moving forward. So I'll pass over to her, but please join me in thanking the panel as we move on here.